Oh, I'm on the wrong page.
I'm making Marcus coffee,
Baruch Hashem.
but I'm babysitting right now. I want to say that.
Yeah.
To do that.
2 days in a row.
Shoot. She went to Florida with her friends.
So we're on the top line by Amar of Kahana. We today's daf is really a tale of two different sugyas, both of which are very difficult. So it's just going to be one of these difficult days. But where we left off yesterday, Rava said kind of a major chiddush, which is that the question was, does Shvius apply to Eitzim or does it not apply to Eitzim? And Rava said that it does not apply to Eitzim. Why? Because Shvius only applies to things where the benefit is done as the item is consumed. So we benefit from food while we're eating it. We can benefit from even the dyes or something like that. Because again, while the dyes, like you were saying, while they're in this vat or whatever it is, while the dyes are doing their thing, they're also kind of dyeing the clothing. As opposed to wood, you burn the wood, you create the coal, and then you use the coal to heat up your food or whatever it is. So there's kind of this lag between when the item is consumed and when you get the benefit. But the Gemara said, is that really true with all wood? I mean, don't you have wood that you use to kind of illuminate your way, like a tiki torch or something like that? The way that Gemara referred to it as kind of oily wood. So Rava's answer was maybe. Rava's answer was maybe, but the reality is that stam, eitzim are done for lahasaka, and therefore, this is really the chiddush of Rava. Even though you'll tell me that there is wood that does fit this category of the consumption happens during the benefit, doesn't matter. Even if you're using that wood as a general category is not subject to shvius because stam, eitzim are meant for hasaka, and even if you can find me an example of wood that in theory, under the regular rules of Shemitah, should be subject to Shemitah, it's not going to be. That was Rava's chiddush. And the Gemara is going to start off today by saying that this chiddush of Rava is really subject to a machlokas tanaim. So Amar of Kahana, top line, Kuf Beis Amar Aleph. Kuf Beis Amar Aleph, top line. Amar of Kahana. He says, Ve'etzim lahasaka tanahi. This idea that stam eitzim are for hasaka, and therefore, again, even if you'll tell me you have an example of eitzim that should be subject to these laws of Shemitah, they're still not going to be. That idea is subject to a machlokas tanaim. Tanya, we have a brisa, again, the Kuf Beis, right at the top. Tanya, we have a brisa, ein mosrin peir shvius, lola mishra, v'lola kvusa. So we're talking about, certain halachos of kedusha shvius. Right, when you have, we tend to think of Shemitah in the context of not working your fields, right? But there's also a whole lot of halachas that have to do with what you have to do with the peiros shvius, which is like a whole other element of Shemitah. So you got to eat them, right? Mm-hmm. But the brisa says you can't use these peiros not to mishra and not to kvusa. So mishra is, I guess, and you have to be there, I guess, but you could take grapes or something like that, and there could have been a use to like soak your flax in this grape thing, and that would have helped. Or to launder your clothing. Again, nowadays that's just not, we don't think of grapes as a detergent, but I guess in those days that was a thing. But the point is, you need to use the grapes to eat them. You can't use them as a detergent. You can't use them to soak your flax. Rav Yossi Omer, no, that's not true. As long you just have to use the peiros shvius. So nosnin peiros shvius. Rav Yossi is a much more makel, and he says you can even use the peiros shvius for these direct food related items. So the Gemara, the brisa continues, or the Gemara says, my time is Rabbanan. What's pshat in the Rabbanan who say that kedusha shvius is limited to eating? Amar Achla. The pasuk says that you got to take the produce, you got to eat it. Below la mishra, la achla, below la kvusa. Achla is dafka, you got to eat it, and you can't use it for these other mundane purposes. For Rav Yossi, Amar Kra lachem. The pasuk says, you have the pasuk on the side. The pasuk says, "V'haisa Shabbos ta'aretz lachem la'achla." So it's to you to eat. So lachem l'chol tzarchechem. I say that lachem includes not only eating but even other things. So obviously we're going to have to understand, according to the Rabbanan, what do they do with lachem and what does Rav Yossi do with la'achla? So that's what the Gemara is going to do. So the Rabbanan na'am yechtiv lachem, right? Lachem should be l'chol tzarchechem. So what do they do with lachem? Lachem dumia de la'achla. They say that lachem teaches them it's got to be similar to la'achla, which is kind of what we saw on the bottom of the previous B'mishana also ubi uro shavan. They say that what does it mean lachem? Its only uses where the consumption of the item coincides with your benefit. Yatsu, Mishra, Ukuvusa, Shana Asan Achar Bi'uran. And that's why we exclude these categories, because both when you, the way Rashi explains, both when you try to launder clothing using these grapes, or when you try to soak the flax, I guess there's some sort of lag. You have to put the stuff in the vat, and then you kind of ruin the clothes because you get them all covered in grape juice. But then I guess over the 3 or 4 days, it works as some sort of detergent or something like that. So before we even go weiter, right, this is really where Rashi kind of explains. You see this long, complicated Rashi on the side. But again, what was the point of all this? The point of all this was, again, we had a Kiddush at the end of yesterday's daf, and that was that wood, right, even if you can find an example of wood as a general matter is not subject to Shemitah because it doesn't have this klal of Hana'asa Nubi'uran Shabbat, right? What if I can find an example of wood where it did, right? If I had a tiki torch or something like that, still it would not be subject to Shemitah because wood as a general matter is not subject to Shemitah. And if Kahana is saying that you see that same idea, albeit a little bit different, in this machlokas Tanaim, because the Rabbanan say that so long as I have grapes that grapes need to be eaten, even if you'll tell me that there's an example of grapes that are not really food, it doesn't really matter. Right? It's kind of like a low plug, just like Rava said with wood on the first thing. Rabbi Yossi seems to disagree with that. And that's really the point of all this, is Rav Kahana saying that this same halacha is really subject to a machlokas tanaim. But either way, we'll just continue on with the back and forth of the Gemara in terms of how do they understand these psukim. So Rabbi Yossi, again, who said that the Kedusha Shvius, right, it's not limited to eating. You can even use these payros for other items. Doesn't it say la'achla? What does he do with the word la'achla? So the Gemara says, Rav Yossi, nami chsiv la'achla, amar lacha, hahu mebayale, l'chedetanya. I'll say la'achla. I'll use it for this other purpose in this brayse. L'tanya la'achla, below limalugma. You need to use the payros shvius to eat it. You can't use it limalugma, which I think means for medicinal purposes. I think limalugma literally means for a plaster, but it's plaster in the medical sense. Maybe you're creating a cast, or I don't exactly know what you're doing. But the Gemara says, "Ata omer la'achla v'lo l'malugma." Oh, eno elo la'achla v'lo l'kvusa. Right? How do I know that the exclusion should be, the miyut should be la'achla v'lo l'malugma? Why didn't you say la'achla v'lo l'kvusa? Right? That you can't use it to launder your clothing. He says, "Kishahu omer lachem," because I also have a reboy. It says lachem. Hare kvusa omer. So I include kvusa in lachem. But the Gemara says, "Hamani mikayim la'achla." So what do you do with la'achla? The achla v'lo l'malugma. So the Gemara says, "Uma ra'is l'rabas hakavusu l'hotias ha'malugma." One of them I'm going to be marbe. One of them I'm going to be mamite. How do I know which one to be marbe, which one to be mamite? So marba ani as hakavusa, I include the ability to do laundry because every single person needs to do laundry. But umotza ani as hamalugma, and then I exclude this medicinal thing because not only people who are achole need to use that, but not other people. So again, according to Rabbi Yossi, he says you've got this miyut in the sense that the pasuk says la'achla, clearly excluding something. You also have a riboy because it says lachem lachos teichem. So what do I do? So Rabbi Yossi says I include certain non-edible uses like doing laundry, but I exclude other purposes like using the perishvias for certain medicinal inyane refuah. Okay. So the Gemara says, "Kaman Azla." This is just a little postscript to the sugya. Kaman Azla Hadatanya. Who is this brisa going like? The brisa says la'achla v'lo l'malugma, la'achla v'lo l'zila. The pasuk says la'achla to exclude medicinal purposes, la'achla to exclude ziluf, which I think is if you got these grapes that I guess smell good, you kind of use them as like an air freshener in your house. You're not supposed to do that. La'achla v'lo lasos menu apictis vizin. La'achla, and you can't use them as a, I don't know what the English word is, but it's like to force yourself to vomit is like an anemic or something like that.
That's when you're real weak.
What is it? Yeah.
Anemic is when you're real weak.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So which one is this, like the Rabbanan or is this like Rabbi Yossi? So the Gemara says, "Come on, Rabbi Yossi, Ika Rabbanan," because if you were telling me this price was like the Rabbanan, there are other categories to exclude. Economy, Mishra Ukvusa, right? They don't even allow the flax thing and laundry. Okay, so we're gonna move on to a little bit of a story and kind of an interesting, totally digression. And then the Gemara is going to get super intense. So for now, we can enjoy a bit of a half amud of just a little chilling. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer im ha shvach. So we had a Mishnah yesterday. In the case of the Mishnah yesterday, was one of the cases was, what if I tell Taylor I want a red thing and he gives me a black one, or I say I want a black one and he gives me a red one? We had a machlokas from Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, exactly what we do in that instance. And the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah. So Yosef Rav Yosef Achorei to Rav Abba Kamei to Rav Huna. So we have Rav Yosef who's sitting behind Rav Abba, who's sitting in front of Rav Huna. So if you're kind of picturing the scene, you got Rav Huna, and then Rav Abba, and then Rav Yosef in the back. The Yosef Rav Huna b'ka Amar, and Rav Huna is, giving shir, whatever it is, and he says like this: Halacha Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. And we don't really explain exactly what we mean, but everyone in the room clearly understood which Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha and which Rabbi Yehuda. So spoiler alert: the Rabbi Yehuda is going to be our Rabbi Yehuda from yesterday's Mishnah, but we don't actually know what the Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha is. The Gemara is going to explain. But either way, that was what shir was. Halacha, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha, and we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Yosef's in the back of the room. Hadrinner of Yosef Lape, he turned around in disgust. He was not happy with this. In Amar, he said, Bishlam, Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha, Itzrich. I could appreciate Rav Huna needed a paskin and tell us that the halacha goes like Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha, because Salka Dartach, I could have had a havamina that Yachid Barabim, halacha Karabim. That any time you have a Yachid Barabim, normally the halacha is like the Rabim. So Kamash Malan, that the halacha in this case is Kiyachid. Right? Now, we don't even know what he's talking about. So the Gemara is going to explain. What even is this Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha? Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha Mahi. What is this Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha? The Tanya, we have a brisa that says Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha Omer, Malve b'shtar ein nifrayin mehen, Malve al peh nifrayin mehen yifnei shu kamat from yada. So again, this case has nothing to do with what we're talking about. There is a halacha in general that when it's around time for a non-religious, non-Jewish holiday, so some other religion's holiday, you shouldn't do good things for them, because assuming they practice Avodah Zarah, because if you do something good for them, now they're going to go to their shul and they're going to thank God for whatever happened to them, because the Chiefs won the Super Bowl or whatever it is. And if they thank their God, and that's a form of Avodah Zarah, and you caused them to thank God, it's almost like a lifnei iver lo sidei michshol.
It's talking about cash. Like you give them money and then you
Wait 1 second. No, that's not what we're talking about. So
You help them to excel their belief in the Avodah Zarah.
something like that. So the question is like this. Apparently, it feels very good to pay off a loan. You owed someone money, and now I don't owe someone money anymore. So you have a milva b'shtar. So it's easy for you to collect this thing whenever you want. You should avoid collecting it right before the yontif, because they might come into yontif feeling good about themselves. My balance sheet is good, right? I don't have this liability anymore. They're going to think they're God, and you kind of cause them to think they're God. So you shouldn't do that.
This proves that they're not Jewish.
They're definitely not
That
Jewish.
They're paying both the law.
Oh, very good. Very good. But if it's a milva al peh, then it's a little bit of a different calculus, because then your rights are not as secured. And we don't want to tell you, this guy is ready to pay you right now. You don't know when the next opportunity is going to come. Meaning, if you have a star, so you can take him to court. What's the big deal? If you don't have a star, you're not really sure when he's going to pay you. So therefore, if he's willing to pay you, just take the money and run. You're right, he's going to go to his synagogue, whatever it is, fine. But don't worry about that. So view it as like you're being matzil miyadim. This was the halacha that Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha said. Obviously, the Rabbanan argued, but Rav Huna said that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha. And Rabbi Yosef said, at least in that halacha, I can understand why it was a chiddush to teach me that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda ben Karcha, because he's arguing against the Rabbah. Ella, halacha Rabbi Yehuda lamali. Why did you need to teach me that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda? Because in this case, we have a machlokas v'achar kach stami, u'machlokas v'achar kach stam, halacha kestam. You didn't need to teach me that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, because I know from just the regular klalei apsak that the halacha was going to be like Rabbi Yehuda, because it's an example of a machlokas v'achar kach stam. And whenever we have a machlokas v'achar kach stam, we always pass like the stam. So what are the words mean machlokas v'achar kach stam? It's an ordering thing. Anytime you have in Shas, you have a machlokas in a Mishnah, but then later on in Shas, you have that halacha brought down as a stam Mishnah or a stam halacha. We always paskin like that shita. So what we're going to prove right now is this halacha of Rabbi Yehuda is an example of a machlokas v'achar kach stam, and therefore I knew already that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. I didn't need Rabbi Yehuda to tell me. So what is this machlokas v'achar kach stam? So we're going to explain. Machlokas is b'baba kama. The machlokas wasn't baba kama. Yesterday's daf. The Mishnah said, "Tzvoalo Edom with Shachar." You told the guy to give you a red suit, he gave you a black suit. Shachar Tzvoa Adam, you told him a black suit, he gave you a red suit. Rav Meir Omer knows loads made tomorrow. Rav Meir says that the tailor was basically kona the item with the shinoi, and therefore he has to reimburse you the money of your tzemer that you gave him. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this is really what we need. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ima shvach yisrael yitzia, noshon lo yitzia, v'ima yisrael shvach, noshon lo shvach." Essentially, yano ala tachtona. This is what we explained yesterday. But the point is, he argues with Rav Meir. But that was a machlokas in Baba Kama. But then in Baba Metzia, we have a stam, right? The stam of Baba Metzia, the Tanam of the Mishnah of Baba Metzia, and it says, Kol Mishana, Yado ala Tachtona. Anytime the Uman is Mishana, his yad is always going to be on the Tachtona. And then another halacha that's not no what we're talking about, if you ever renege on a business, agreement, your yad is always on the Tachtona. But the bottom line is the question that Rav Yosef is asking to Rav Huna is, why did you need to sit here and share? And passing like the halachas like Rav Yehuda, we know the halachas like Rav Yehuda because it's an example of a machlokas ba'achar kach stam, and every time we have a machlokas ba'achar kach stam, we always pass them like the stam. So why do you need to, teach us this and share? Rav Huna, he'll respond. He said, what makes you think? How do you know which one's first and which one's second? Right? Maybe this is an example of stam ba'achar kach machlokas. Maybe the machlokas of Mitzvah came first. So you have a machloka, you have a stam. But Rav Yosef says, what are you talking about? We have a klal that machlokas b'achar kach stam. You're telling me, well, ain't seder l'mishnah, so then when can I ever invoke this principle? If every single time, right, you need to assume there's some sort of order to the Mishnah, because if not, how do I ever understand this rule? I know there's a rule like this, so how would this work? Rav Huna will say, no. He says, no. If you're in one mesechta, then of course you have this klal of machlokas ba'achar kach stam. What I meant was in different mesechtos. One is Baba Kama, one is Baba Metzia. So how do you know which one came first? If it was all in Baba Kama, so of course we have this halacha of machlokas ba'achar kach stam. But Rav Yosef will respond, kula nezikin chada mesechlihi, that all of nezikin, which by the way is not all of nezikin, it's all the babas. All of the babas are one mesechta, and therefore, because all the babas are one mesechta, I know that Baba Kama came before Baba Metzia, and that seems to be this machlokas. Rav Huna says, I'm not so convinced that all of the babas are one mesechta. Baba Kama is a mesechta, Metzia is a mesechta, Baba Basra is a mesechta, and therefore this rule of machlokas b'achar kach stam cannot be applied in the babas. So, maybe we'll tell you a different answer. Is Mishnah Tani la Gabi Hilchsa Psikta that Kol Mishana Yaro al Tachtona v'Chala Chozer ba Yaro al Tachtona. Maybe the Gemara says that really Rav Yosef agreed to Rav Huna that maybe these are different mesechtas, but how do I know that we paskin like that Stam Mishnah and Bava Metzia? Because in the context of those Mishnayos, it would not have made sense to teach us this halacha. They were talking about something else entirely. And the fact that they taught this halacha as just more of almost like a list of settled halachas, that's how I know that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, Rabbi Huna, you do not need to teach me that we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. So again, we'll go weiter. We're going to actually stop a little short today. Not right here. We'll stop kind of when the lines get wide, but I'm just warning you, this is not an easy Gemara coming up. Tana Rabbana. This is right up Randy's alley, right? Just one slight introduction. This is from the Mishnah yesterday. We had a machlokas, Rav Meir, and Rabbi Yehuda that we just kind of touched on. And the machlokas goes like this. If you ask an uman to do something, you ask someone, I wanted a red suit, he gave me a black suit. Rav Meir says that the person who kind of messed up the uman, he didn't listen to you, he messed up, he is now kona the item and has to reimburse you what you gave him. Rabbi Yehuda says that's not really how it works, right? He's not kona with the shinoi, you have to work out a whole different arrangement. Okay. So this new case, right, Tana Rabbana, hanosein ma'os l'shlufa, let's say you give money to your shliach, v'kach lo chitin, v'lakach mehen sa'orin. You wanted chitin, and he bought sa'orin. Sa'orin v'lakach mehen chitin. You wanted sa'orin, and he gave you chitin. Critical to understand for this sugya is that we're not just buying barley and grain to make bread. This is the commodities trader. So this is a person who's calling his broker. He's calling up Randy, and he's saying, "Listen, I need you. I want to buy pork bellies or whatever on whatever exchange, right? And for whatever reason, the arrangement was going to be that should the thing go up in value, they were going to be partners. So I was going to supply all the cash. You were the expert who knew which commodities to buy, and we're going to share in the proceeds. That was going to be the arrangement. The problem is, I told you to buy chitin, and you went ahead and you bought sa'orim, or vice versa. So what happens now? So Tanya Chada, one of the Bryces says, impachsu pachsu lo, vimosiru lo. Now the commodities trader is on his own. You do not listen to the investor, so you're on your own. If it goes up, wonderful. If it goes down, it's on you. But the other Bryce says no. In pachsu lo. If it goes down in value, you're right. It's osiru emsa. Yeah, exactly. So it's heads I win, tails you lose, right? It's kind of like you didn't listen to me, and therefore, if this investment goes sour, that's all on you. If it goes up in value, that's our arrangement, right? So how do we understand the seer and the Bryces, right? One of the Bryces says that it's just always goes according to the commodities trader, right? He has to suffer the losses and he gets all the gains. The other one says we share the gains, but you get all the losses. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan, Lo Ka'asha, he says this is literally our machlokas, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Ha Rabbi Meir and ha Rabbi Yehuda, and he explains. Ha Rabbi Meir to Amar Shinui Kona. Rabbi Meir's thing in our Mishnah was that any time the Uman there's some sort of Shinui, he's Kona the item, and therefore if it goes up, he's Kona the Shvach, and if it goes down, he's got to suffer the consequence. Vaha Rabbi Yehuda. The other one is Rabbi Yehuda, Damar Shinui Eno Kona. He says that Shinui is not Kona, and therefore if it goes up in value, we're still partners. So if it goes down in value, why are we not partners in the loss? So the Rishonim explain that if it goes down in value, there's a concept in shlichus that basically says, I made you a shliach to do good things for me, not to do bad things for me. So if you didn't listen to me and the things goes down in value, that's kind of on you. But even if you didn't listen to me, but the bottom line is, it went up in value, that we can share in all of the upside. But Maskepler Belazar is listening to this, and he says, I'm not so sure I agree with you that Rav Meir would even hold of this halacha in our case. He says, Mimai. Dilma kan lok amar Rav Meir.
I agree if you lose the money.
Yes.
They both agree.
They both
the
agree.
Question when they don't agree, if because you didn't listen and you did what you did, the game.
Exactly. Because Rav Meir's shita is, according to Rav Yochanan, Rav Meir's shita is that once the guy doesn't listen to me, at that point he was Kona the item.
Right.
He just has to reimburse me for whatever I gave him, whatever I paid him.
Right.
So now he's the owner. Rabbi Yehuda says he never looked at it that way, even in our Mishnah. He says, no. The guy wasn't Kona with a shinoi. You got to just work out some arrangement. So that's the arrangement that they'll work out. Is, again, heads I win, tails you lose. That's their arrangement right now.
Okay.
But Rabbi Lazar says, I'm not so sure that that's Shitas Rav Meir. Because maybe Shitas Rav Meir is that shinoi is only Kona, right? If I wanted a black suit and you gave me a red suit, I wanted a black suit. So you kind of messed up, right? But over here, Avolaschora, where I'm hiring Randy to make an investment for me, lo amar, maybe I don't really care if you bought the chitim or the swarm. I want a return. That's what I want. I'm trusting you that you know what you're doing. Right? So do I really care if I said chitin and you saw a better opportunity with Seorim, or if I said Seorim and you saw a better opportunity with chitin? The bottom line is, so long as it goes up in value, I don't really care, right? So chitin, Seorim, pork bellies, it's all the same, right? So again, Dilma ad kan lo ka'amar Rav Meir elamidi l'chazir legufe avalas chora lo amar ela amar Rav Elazar. So how does Rav Elazar understand the steer on these two prices? He says, Ha Rav Meir. Both of them are actually Shitas Rav Meir. V'lo kasha, kan la'achila, and kan l'schora, in the price that said that you always give the money back, and the upside or the downside is all by the shliach. That's where the guy wanted the chitin or the seorim to cook with it. He literally wanted chitin and seorim. So if you get him the wrong thing, he didn't do what the guy asked, and therefore there was a shinoi, and therefore the shliach needs to kind of own the produce, whether it goes up or it goes down. But the other case that said we split the proceeds if it goes up, but you take all the loss if it goes down, that's the example of hiring a commodities trader. And again, the guy, you're a shliach either way. Rav Meir wasn't super mocked what you're buying for him. All he wanted was that the thing goes up in value. Okay, but what we really need for this, for the rest of this, what we're going to do today, is the first shita, which was Shitas Rav Yochanan, and how he understood Rabbi Yehuda. And the way he understood Rabbi Yehuda was he said that you're not, doesn't really seem like you're quite a shliach. You didn't really do what the guy wanted, but at the same time, he doesn't hold to this view of shinui kona, and therefore it seems like if it goes up in value, we kind of share it, and if it goes down in value, it all the loss goes to the commodities trader. In our example, we're just going to go with Randy. All the loss will go with Randy. So this is the halacha, and the Gemara says machku Allah b'marava in Marava, which again Rav Yochanan was in Eretz Yisrael, so it's someone specific in Eretz Yisrael. He just didn't understand this, and he kind of laughed at Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Yehuda. He said, "V'chi mi hodio lebal chitin sheik nechitin lebal mos." He says, "I don't understand. How are they sharing in the upside? Like, meaning he didn't. It's not really a shlichus exactly. So the guy who owned the commodities, who's selling to this investor guy, not really the investor, the trader. Like, how does this work that the investor can share in the upside? Who told the Baal Chitin, the seller, that this guy was ever even involved? So it's a bit of a hard question to really understand. And that's why the whole Gemara is very difficult, because it's like, is it just shlichus, right? And all the Rishonim, it's you'll see, you can always tell Gemara apart by the amount of article pages that try to explain it. And there's a lot of article pages here. But Maskepler of Shmuel Bar Sasrati, he says he kind of doesn't even understand the question. What you're basically telling me is, who told the Baal Chitin? Why do we care if the commodities trader messed up what he was asking? Even if he asked for the right thing, still, who told the Baal Chitin? Meaning, this all works midin shlichus, right? So what's the problem? But Amar Avavo, no. Shiny chitin v'chitin the shlichus say ka'avid. If the instruction to Randy was to buy chitin, and Randy bought chitin, that would be classic case of shlichus, and we don't really need the seller to know exactly who he's selling it to. But the question is, if the Randy deviates from what the investor wanted, now we create a problem in the shlichus. That seems to be this. It's a very subtle dispute, but that seems to be
Again, repeat the last statement.
It seems to be that the question seems to be, right, we all agree there's a concept of shlichus, right? So sometimes an agent can do things on behalf of the Baal Bayis. The question is, what if the agent kind of messes up and he doesn't do exactly what the Baal Bayis asked for, right? So do we say now there's something wrong with the shlichus, or do we say no, as long as he's doing it on behalf of the guy, the investor, and the investor would want the thing, assuming it goes up in value, he would want you to do it. So is that enough where the investor can kind of share in the upside? That's kind of the question.
Just to put it in dollar terms.
Yes.
Just the guy sold. Go to the agent buys $100 worth of wheat from a seller, and he tells the seller, "Give me 10% of the wheat and give 90% of the wheat to the buyer." And that to me seems to be, how does the owner know that that's what he should do?
Exactly. But one of the things that's you'll see, and Tosfos really gets into this, is one of the issues seems to be that no one notified the seller that there was an arrangement here. The seller had no reason to think that he wasn't selling directly to Randy.
Right.
And the question is, does he need to? Like in other cases of shlichus, does he need to know necessarily? So it seems to be, it depends on whether the shliach is doing what he was supposed to do or not.
And also a little further is when the shliach tells the seller to give 10% to him and 90% to the buyer, as an example, how does he know that it's true? What requirements does he have in order to make it? Otherwise, the sale is null and void.
So it's a very difficult shaklavataria. Again, the Rishonim really struggle with just really pashut shot kind of in this Gemara. But either way, so the question was, if you think he wouldn't be a shliach like that, why would he be a shliach? If you didn't tell the seller, even if it was chitin b'chitin, right? It still shouldn't work. But Amar Amar Rav Avo, he says, I don't even understand your question. Shiny chitin v'chitin v'shlichusei ka'avin. And that's kind of what we're all speaking out, right? He says it's pasha to me whether or not the seller knew who he was selling to. If the shliach is doing what he was told, then the shlichus will work, right? That is just a regular case of shlichus. The question is if there was some sort of deviation. If Randy was supposed to buy chitin, but he bought orin, and the seller doesn't know who he's selling to, is it even possible that the original investor can share now in the upside? Or do you say, no, who was makna? Who was makna this stuff to you that you can have an ownership? Teida, and he says, I'll prove to you that you can have a concept of shlichus even if no one told the seller. This is a Mishnah in Ksubas and Erchin. So echad hamakdish nechasa. Let's say a person says, I want to be makdish all of my stuff. Echad hamayrichas atzmo. I want to do erchin for all of my stuff. Ein lo b'ksus ishto b'lo b'ksus banav. My wife's clothing and my kids' clothing are not included. My stuff is my stuff, not my wife's and my kids' stuff. V'lo b'tzeva shetzava lishman. And not even, so the assumption would be, man bought some clothes, took it straight to the tanner guy and said, make this wonderful for my wife. Never even told his wife that he was doing this, right? Even that clothes would not be included in this. Same idea. If I bought new shoes, I ordered them on Amazon, they haven't come to the house, no one knows about it yet, still that's not going to be included in my hektish vow. Who told this dyer that those clothing belonged to the wife? The dyer thinks that it belongs to the husband. So therefore, why isn't it included in this erchin? It must be because shlichus still works, even though no one told the actual owner. But Amar Rav Abba, he says, I actually don't think that's a good raya. I mean, it's not clear that he's disagreeing with the concept that shlichus could work. He's just saying, I don't think that's a good raya from that Mishnah, because lo kol hamakdish nechasav ein daito al ksus ishto ubanav. Maybe I'll just tell you that's not the pshat. It's when I'm doing hektish, I just don't have das on things that don't belong to me. So it's not a shlichus thing. It's just when I was makdish all of my stuff, I didn't have in mind the stuff that was at the dry cleaners that's for my wife. But Maskefler of Zera, he says, I don't think that was necessarily a good question, because I will tell you that people generally, when they're makdish, they also don't have das on their tefillin. They don't want to be makdish their tefillin. And still, it's not a makdish nechasav ma'ilon lo tefillin. We still have to appraise the value of the tefillin, even though you wouldn't have had in mind. So Amar le'ebaya nechatesi in daitosh lo tefillin. I'll tell you that people do have in mind their tefillin. Why? Because a makdish nechasav, whenever someone is makdish all of their stuff, savar mitzvah ka'avid, they're thinking, I'm doing a mitzvah. And therefore they would include their tefillin. So what's going on over here? So it's the ein daito shel adam al ksus ishto ubanav mishum eva. I'll tell you, there's a difference between tefillin and clothing of your family, because the last thing you want to do is to be makdish your wife's clothing and then come home and she's all upset. So there's a shalom bias issues. So maybe I would have had in mind to be makdish my own tefillin. I would never have had in mind to be makdish my wife's clothing. Maskefla, Rav, we're going to end in a minute. Maskefla of Oshia, Alo Chayve Erichin Shanuk. And if you're telling me that this all has to do with what you have in mind, right? We're dealing with Erichin, right? So first of all, what is the concept of Erichin? You basically say, I'm making a promise that I'm going to give to Hector the value of, let's say, like myself or something like that. Utzanan, so we're dealing with Erichin. Utzanan, we have a Mishnah that Chayve Erichin Mashkinin Osan, that if I pledge an Erich, they can take a mashkon from me. Now again, would anyone in their right mind pledge, so much that someone would take a mashkon from them? Rather, how do you understand this? Why is it true that when you're makdish your stuff, your wife's stuff isn't included? It's the assumption is that you kind of did a little bit of estate planning, that you realized you were about to be makdish your stuff, so you kind of purposely set up some sort of LLC to put all of their stuff that hektish couldn't touch it, and that's why your wife's clothing and your kids' clothing are not included when it's all separate. So again, not a very easy.
No, but
Daf.